Welcome to another episode of This Is Why I Don't Vote, a podcast. Season 3, Episode 41. Your safe space to discuss sports, politics, social issues, and even religion, where we will take it all very seriously, but not too seriously. Yeah, I have to get my 2 cents in on the Seldowitz guy that was mocking the the street cart vendor in New York, though my take will be a little bit different, as I'm wont to do. It helps illustrate a point that I've been making on the podcast for 3 years now, that there really isn't any distinction between the political parties, and there certainly isn't any distinction in the policy that's being enacted by the bureaucrats that are appointed by the political parties, by the politicians that win these elections. Then we can make a sharp turn and we could talk about a television program that I've quite enjoyed over the course of the last 8 years. Fargo, Season 5 dropped, as the kids would say, debuted on Tuesday, and we got 2 episodes, which I love. I love the fact that they do that. We got 2 episodes of the new season. Let's reflect on what was Fargo Season 5, Episodes 1 and 2. Thank you all sincerely and dearly for your continued support, for listening to this podcast. Please like, subscribe, give it 5 stars, write a review, thumbs up, what have you. If you are new to the podcast, you'll notice that there are no sponsors. I have not yet had the opportunity to get a sponsor. So if you like what you hear, please consider supporting. This Is Why I Don't Vote podcast is on Patreon. Off we go.
Act 1. There is no distinction in policy between the political parties.
You've heard me prattle on and on about the fact that the political parties are essentially the same, that the bureaucracy in Washington, D.C. is a unified force. There's really no, what's the word I'm looking for? It's probably practical. There's no practical difference between one bureaucrat under a Democratic administration, and there's no difference between a bureaucrat in a Republican administration from a practical standpoint. Now, what do I mean by that? I probably am not using the right word, but substantively, in policy, procedure, you're getting the same thing. So you vote for Party A, you vote for Party B. The effect is the same. The policy is the same. Longtime listeners will know that I've been saying that for roughly 3 years, and I'm not the only voice out there saying that, although I don't think that there are enough voices. I want to reiterate, the parties are not substantively different. Yes, you can go and identify issue A or issue B, and really, that's the facade, that's the surface level issues that we can argue about on cable news and on social media. Deep down, when it gets to domestic policy, when it gets to foreign policy, when it gets to the budget, when it gets to who wins and who loses, it's all the same, folks. And to illustrate that point, a point that I could not make any more succinctly than has been made in public over the course of the last week, a video goes viral of a man berating. And berate is probably not the right word, because it's this really kind of douchey, wow, immediately getting in my ego right there. I'm not going to qualify it any more than it needs to be qualified, because the video speaks for itself. Guy goes up to a halal vendor or a hot dog vendor, I can't remember, street cart vendor in New York City of foreign descent, and begins to mock him about his perceived faith, about his perceived nationality, and the conflict in Israel, the siege of Gaza to eliminate Hamas. Well, it turns out that this guy isn't just some random guy, some random douche in New York City. His name is Stuart Seldowitz. This guy is a bureaucrat. He is one of the bureaucrats who served in the Obama administration. He worked in the U.S. Department of State, the Office of Israel and Palestine Affairs from 1999 to 2003, and he also worked in the National Security Council Doing what substantively? Who knows? Who knows? Now, I'm not the first person to say it. I probably won't be the last. This is illustrative of how our State Department, how our bureaucracy in Washington, D.C. operates. What is the substantive difference between a Republican administration and a Democratic administration? Really nothing. You're not getting any substantive difference. What's fascinating to me is how many of the people that have worked in the bureaucracy in Washington, D.C. for years and have come out and are now, quote unquote, exposing themselves. And why do I put that in quotes? It's because they're starting to speak more intimately about their thoughts, their beliefs, and those thoughts and beliefs were present in White House administrations, in governmental agencies for decades, very likely influencing the policies, not only domestically but abroad, that we as a people had no idea these representatives of our government, these representatives of our country held. I'm going to use a law enforcement analogy. I've used it before. I think it works here. I've heard judges say this numerous times, and not just one judge saying it multiple times. I've heard numerous judges say it numerous times. I've heard numerous police officers say it. Not one police officer saying it numerous times. I've heard numerous police officers say this numerous times. They catch you speeding. You've robbed a store. There's a rape. There's a murder. This isolated incident isn't isolated. Very likely people have done these things over and over again, and it's just when you get caught. It's the moment that you get caught that you're being penalized, that there's regret. So many people in law enforcement justify harsh penalties on an offender that has only been caught once. Their mindset is, this person has likely done things like this more than once. Therefore, we can impose what would be a more draconian penalty on them than one incident would warrant because they've likely done it multiple times. They've only gotten caught this once. Now, the linear analogy would be, okay, here's this person. They're berating a street cart vendor. It gets videoed. It is then published to the masses on the social medias. It goes viral. As the analogy goes, this person has likely done this many times. This is the first time that they've been caught. I'm actually going to impose this attitude from this Seldowitz guy onto many of the bureaucrats that are working in Washington, D.C., in different types of agencies. And I'm not so much making a point about Islamophobia or the fact that this guy would go and confront anyone over anything in a public place in such a peculiar way. It's the uniformity of thought between the people we believe to represent one party or the other. It's us. We are now seeing in real time the lack of distinction between the people that we're voting for and the people that work within the infrastructure of these political parties, the people that are appointed to these agencies in Washington, D.C. as members of Party A or Party B. There's no real difference. There just isn't any distinction to be made. Yes, this is a quote-unquote isolated incident by one person, but given the way the United States has dealt with the Israel-Palestine conflict over the course of the past 40 years, does this person not represent the attitude of the U.S. State Department, the U.S. government in that conflict? Would you not, dear listener, if you had no idea who this person served under, would you not, after hearing what he said in the video, would you believe him to be a member of a Democratic administration or a Republican administration? If it were just this guy was in the State Department and was working in the Department of Israel-Palestine Affairs, which administration would you believe him to be working in? Maybe this is my own internal bias coming through. I believe most people would say it would either be the Trump administration or the Bush administration. Ladies and gentlemen, That's what hope and change looks like. That's hope and change. Does hope and change look that different from mission accomplished or make America great again? A bit of a tangent. I've been a baby about getting onto the social medias and actually promoting this podcast. It's something that I am wrestling with, and I know that I need to start getting onto the social medias, making more videos. That's the way this podcast is actually going to get more listeners, more subscribers. It's the way it's going to grow. I am reiterating in this segment, and very likely I'm going to start putting it out on the social medias, if we want to see any change, it is not a change in the governmental structure, in the balance of power with the three governmental institutions, the executive, the judiciary, the legislative. It's not with the political parties, it's with us. We have to start being smarter, and that really means being strategic about the way that we vote. So I'm getting back to it. Vote against the incumbent, and do so with intent, with vocalized, with strategic intent, so that you're not getting these pundits the day after an election saying that whoever won for whatever reason they want to make up. We have to be strategic, and we have to be vocal about that strategy. Incumbents are losing elections because we're simply throwing them out as American voters because we're not getting anything substantively different between Party A and Party B. It doesn't matter who we vote for. And this couldn't be a better time in our nation's history to do something like this, because what happens? We overturn the majority in the House to the Democrats. We overturn the majority in the Senate to the Republicans. Look at what it is right now. It's practically a stalemate between the two because it's 50-50. Any pearl clutching about the devastation that Party A or Party B could do in such a scenario is moot. It's actually asinine based on the circumstances of the majorities, if you could call them that, today. Squeaky thin margins give us an opportunity, and I say us as the American electorate, to enact such a plan. Now, I'm not a social media guru. In fact, I'm lower than a novice, and I've demonstrated as much over the 3 years that I've had this podcast, but I'm going to begin with vote against the incumbent. We've got less than a year until the next election, and I believe that it's time. Yes, there are some third-party candidates out there that might make a move, might make a run, given the presidential candidates that we have, but the problem is much deeper than saying if we have a different president, we're not going to have the same types of problems. This is systemic within our political system. It goes well beyond the office of the executive. We're looking at legislative seats in Congress, in the state legislatures. It needs to be a more programmatic global movement. Why, you may ask? So that the bureaucracy understands the dynamic, the pressures that these politicians are under. If a bureaucrat believes their job to be compromised because a politician doesn't have any stability, there's no way that they're going to be able to keep their position because the politician can't keep their position. Therefore, the bureaucrat is going to be under more pressure to answer to the will of the politician that is answering to the will of the people. Think about the insulation that someone like Stuart Seldowitz feels. This person can just operate within the landscape that is the Washington, D.C. bureaucracy, moving in and out of it without real fear of repercussion because of the fact that many of the policies, again, domestic and abroad, between the parties, they're the same. Substantively, they're operating the same way, they're doing the same thing. One person isn't going to be able to, quote unquote, drain that swamp. One president in a 4 or 8 year period can't do it. Who can, though? You, dear listener, me, dear listener, we, dear listener, we can make that change. That bloodless coup can happen, and it starts by voting against the incumbent.
Act 2 Reflections on Fargo Season 5, Episodes 1 and 2.
There aren't a lot of television programs that I still watch that are worthy of me talking about on the podcast. I did the final season of Better Call Saul, which I thought was well warranted. I thought the show had many of the attributes of Breaking Bad, had its own twists, had its own turns. It had a different pace. I enjoyed it. I know some people did not. What I really liked, though, was how it fleshed out the Breaking Bad universe. I was somewhat negligent in failing to have an episode recap of Peaky Blinders, another show that I really enjoy, and I would put in the same vein as a Mad Men, as a Breaking Bad. As I state over and over again, I'm usually the last to know, even on the social medias. I am subscribed to many of the feeds that I think would give me the information that would lead me in the direction of Program A or Program B. I just don't look at social media often enough to get those notices. 2 shows have come out recently that I follow, one of them being The Crown, which is on Netflix, the other being Fargo, which is on FX, released the next day on Hulu. I make note of the fact that it's released the next day on Hulu because there are many profanities that are in this television program bleeped out for the network broadcast, kept in for the Hulu broadcast. Yes, I do watch it on Hulu. I'm a fan of Noah Crawley. I'm a fan of the Fargo series. I loved the movie. I love the way that they have this universe that they've created based off of the movie. I say they. It's really Noah Crawley, an acolyte of the Coen brothers. I love the way he's taken what they did and created his own universe that still has all of the same quirks. Is that the best way to say it? Routinely pays homage to the original film and then has its own little twists, its own little turns, similar to what Better Call Saul was to the Breaking Bad universe. I was unaware that The Crown was coming out with a new season, and it turns out a final season that's going to deal with the end of the relationship between Prince Charles and Princess Diana and the end of Princess Diana's life. And I was completely unaware until a podcast guest, one Jason, my buddy who has helped me with some of the Idiots Discuss Sports episodes and did the breakdown of the latest Wes Anderson movie, Asteroid City. He sent me a text earlier this week, and I was excited to learn that Fargo had a season 5, that it was delayed by the writer strike, the actor strike, and now we have a season 5, which I fear could be the last of these Fargo seasons that are being written and directed and produced by Noah Crawley. Given that it takes place in the year of our Lord 2019, I'm not sure how much further they can go with the story, although I really don't care because I love the way that it's told, and each one of them has had such personality and have been a great addition to the Fargo universe. Each one of them not only self-referential, and when I say self-referential, I mean referencing not only the movie, but many of the past seasons of Fargo. So you have a season of Fargo based in the Fargo universe. Sometimes it's the past that is being illustrated or elucidated. Sometimes it's the future. And these episodes reference not only the movie, the universe of the movie, but they also reference the universe of other seasons. So if you're not watching, you're truly missing out. If you haven't seen the original movie Fargo, first of all, shame on you. Again, strike against your resume as a consumer of the cinematic arts. And if you have seen the movie Fargo and are saying to me right now, as you're listening to this, hey, jackass, I haven't seen that movie in 20 years, go watch it again. Given all the nonsense that is now available to all of us on social media, given all the nonsense that's available to us on all of these streaming services, you can certainly go back and watch what is a masterpiece of theater in the original Fargo. And then Because in your more mature state, you will realize, yes, that was a great movie. It is a great movie. Now I'm compelled to go watch the television show. You will seek out the television show. The television show has all of the same paces that other great television shows have had over the course of the past 15, 20 years. The music is fantastic. It is timely. It's always appropriate for the scene, appropriate for the mood. They have very well done montages throughout the course of these episodes that help progress the storyline, and they have very intricate stories being told. Character development is actually important to Noah Crowley. Character development, which is so barren in the landscape of television and movies today, is very well done in these Fargo seasons. And that's especially difficult given the fact that these seasons are only 10 episodes long, and you're getting an hour, well, with commercials, 48 minutes worth of content in each episode. So it takes strategy. It takes thinking it out to have each one of these characters throughout the course of that limited amount of time given an opportunity to breathe, to express themselves, to have a story arc. Well, enough about the gushing. The rest of this segment will be a pure and unadulterated spoiler alert, so be warned. Episode 1. Let's talk first about the music. The episode opens with a fantastic song. I've Seen All Good People by the band Yes. Love it. And it opens with a slow motion of what I thought was a PTA meeting. It turns out it's just a school board meeting that goes into a dark and disturbing direction from the onset. It's a total melee. And at first I didn't know whether or not it was a dream sequence, whether or not the violence that I was seeing perpetrated was part of the reality of the scene. I wasn't sure whether or not, because it was in slow motion, that these people were actually engaging in violent conduct, or if it was somehow being acted out as part of some strange dream sequence. It just didn't make sense until it did. Now, as you may be interpreting here, dear listener, from my tone, from the way I'm speaking about Fargo, the movie, Fargo, these television episodes, Noah Crowley, I'm a fan. And in the first scene of the first episode of season 5, Crawley demonstrates why the show is so good. In the midst of this melee, of this barbarism between what are PTA parents, that's probably the best category for them. You've seen these clips online of the PTA parents starting to yell at one another. This is the next iteration of it, where the violence is actually being acted out. And the math teacher comes over to the show's, I guess you'd call her the protagonist, and says, as he grabs her, "No one is listening to me." In the midst of this violence, no one is listening to me. I thought it was brilliant. It encapsulates in the year 2019 what civil society has really become. We're not listening to one another. It leads to, we resort to violence. And in the midst of that violence, in this fictional scene, the character is still more concerned with whether or not they're being heard than with what is going on as a result of no one listening to one another. This cry, this desperate plea, no one is listening to me. Hell, it actually reminded me of me. Maybe that's the reason why I'm doing this podcast in the first place. Hey, no one's listening to me. And of course, because the show has this dark sense of humor, this protagonist turns around and hits him with the stun gun, hits him with the taser. 2 minutes in to the first episode of the 5th season of Fargo, we're off to the races. It's clear by this woman's reaction, this woman we really don't even know. All we know is that she's with her daughter at this PTA-style board meeting of the school, and that in her being arrested is now going to be booked. And the concern that she has about her fingerprints going into the system, now we've got a story. Now we realize she's got a past. I considered going through the episode pace by pace And I don't feel that's a good use of the time, given all of the other things that I wanted to talk about in these 2 episodes. Yes, we're going to do episode 1 and episode 2. Thankfully, they released both of them in the premiere. So we've got 2 different opportunities. We've got 2 different episodes to look at. I love the way that Crowley references the Fargo universe and subtly flips all of the script, so to speak. What do I mean by that? Well, in this episode, we quickly learn that this woman, who we'll call the protagonist, Dot, she's married to a very meek, I will call him, that's probably the best word, a very meek man who is the son of a very, very wealthy woman. A wealthy woman who, by the way, we do not know the source of her wealth as of yet. That's a great twist on the original Fargo movie, where I don't know that we could call the protagonist in that movie the son-in-law, but the son-in-law is married to a very meek woman whose father is very wealthy, and he is the general manager of a car dealership that the father-in-law owns. In this telling of the story, in this part of the Fargo universe, it's the mother who is basically gifted a car dealership to her meek, in the mother's mind, very likely feeble son, who ends up marrying the woman who is, for all intents and purposes, the protagonist. The story wastes no time in getting to the point. I believe it's after the first commercial break, we have an homage to the kidnapping scene in the original Fargo movie. In season 5, we have kidnappers coming to get the protagonist after she has been fingerprinted after her arrest. The homage goes as far as to have this woman sitting on the couch knitting, just as the woman was in the Fargo movie during the kidnapping scene, and it also goes through the escapade that is the actual kidnapping. Yet in this iteration, the twist is the woman does not so meekly go down. She puts up a fight, and it turns out that that is going to be representative of who she is, as part of the mystery of who she is, as we start to develop a relationship with this character. The homage continues as the kidnappers escort this woman beyond the county lines, beyond the state lines, from Minnesota into North Dakota, and here we have what? The police pulling them over, there being a shootout, and in the twist of the kidnappers from the movie to this television show, you've got the Buscemi character who is injured, right, in the movie, and you've got the character in this season 5, episode 1 situation also being injured, yet in this iteration, that injury completely incapacitates this person, whereas the Buscemi character was pushing through the injury, a more gruesome, grotesque injury, and would not let it stop him from his ultimate goal of keeping all of the money. The more dangerous of the kidnapping antagonists is this strange mix. There is an homage to numerous previous Coen brother characters in different films. This person has the nihilism of the Kurt character in The Big Lebowski. I believe that character was also wearing a kilt. He has the dry, deadpan demeanor of the antagonist kidnapper in the Fargo movie. And he, maybe this is just me, has an Anton Chigurh vibe from No Country for Old Men. Speaking of No Country, the shootout scene in the gas station, where this antagonist kidnapper is standing there waiting to see what's going to happen after he expels many around from his gun, and he realizes that somebody's going to start shooting back at him, diving out of the way of that gunfire. It immediately struck that No Country scene where Chigurh is walking down the protagonist in that movie after he shoots up the pickup truck. And in another subtle twist to No Country, instead of it being the person who is being stalked by Chigurh in that scene looking in the rear view mirror of the truck, it's this antagonist kidnapper character that takes down a reflective item to use it as a mirror to see whether or not the person that he's exchanging fire with, the police officer, is around the corner, then getting hit by our female protagonist and knocked out. It's all very subtle and it's all very clever, and it's woven in a way where you watch it and you might have those references come to you, but it's not so overbearing that it's distasteful, cartoonish. And by the way, some of these things I picked up on in the first watching. Yes, I did watch both episodes a second time, recognizing that some of the things that I saw, I didn't give it the space to breathe. I didn't really pause it and rewind it and then look at it from the lens of, is this something that reminds me of something else? I wanted to absorb the story as it was being told. Then I went back and I looked at things and I rewound them and then thought about cross-references. Now, if you're a Coen Brothers fanboy and a fanboy of Noah Crawley, he uses the same type of Kafka-esque through line in these Fargo series as the Coen Brothers do in their movies. Now, what do I mean by that? It was actually in an interview that the Coen Brothers themselves explained this Kafka-esque through line, that they wanted to have something that was completely in opposite to the story that was being told. It kind of came out of the blue, and then have it play somehow as a through line in the story they were telling. So there'd be anticipation leading up to it, there'd be an event, and then there'd be the aftermath of that event. It would not be in accordance with the overall theme or the story that was being told. It would be something that was Kafkaesque. It was out of the blue. It didn't really correlate or correspond to any of the other elements of the story. And in each one of the preceding seasons, there's been this strange through line. In the last season, it was the tornado. In season 2, it was the UFO. These things are ever present in Coen Brothers movies, and Noah Crawley, as an homage to the Coen Brothers and the stories that they tell, incorporates that as a through line into these Fargo seasons. What is the Kafkaesque, this strange through line in Fargo season 5? It appears so far to be the Bisquick. Our protagonist's obsession with the Bisquick. Got to get those vitamins and minerals in the morning. There is so much more to go into. I probably could do a segment for 20 or 30 minutes on each one of these episodes. But because you're listening to the editor of this podcast, the editor is telling the podcaster, hurry the hell up. This is going to take hours and hours of your time to edit properly. Let's move on to episode 2, where I love the twist that instead of a crime family being at the center, or crime families being at the center of the story, it's instead law enforcement, a libertarian sheriff in a remote North Dakota county, where the law of the land, I guess, is freedom, at least according to the sheriff and his son, yet that freedom seems to be at the behest, at the largesse of the sheriff himself. At this point in the season, we do not know the extent that the sheriff may be involved in illegal activities. We do know at this point that the sheriff has what you would call a posse of deputies and what appears to be ranch hands or ranchers at his disposal, not trying to be crude and still trying to honor my new spiritual path. But don't think that my penis didn't get hard when watching the 2 FBI agents drive up. You didn't hear Working Man by Rush come over the television set. The scene where the Anton Chigurh kidnapper antagonist is taking on what I would call a Jaqen H'ghar type personality from Game of Thrones, where he refers to himself as a man. I'm not sure if that has any place in the Coen Brothers Fargo universe. It did strike me as a bit strange when I started to hear him use that type of pronoun, because it's not even a pronoun. In each of the Fargo seasons, there's always been that wild card, and this is clearly the wild card. I appreciated the scene with Jennifer Jason Leigh, who is great in this, by the way, confronting Dot, our protagonist kidnappee, in her own home, and then seeing Dot have that turn where this facade that she's putting on as the unassuming suburban housewife is quickly dispelled, not only in demeanor, but in speech, in language. The confrontation was so authentic. The way that Jennifer Jason Leigh reacts to this Jekyll and Hyde that appears right before her, being momentarily taken aback, then gathering herself and having one of her smug, superior quips as she exits the scene. Absolutely brilliant. Kudos to Dave Foley. He's great in this as well as the lawyer for the wealthy mother-in-law. I'm interested to see what the backstory is on him losing that eye. I'm hoping we are told that story, as well as some other mysteries that have yet to been revealed. Namely, again, the source of the mother-in-law's wealth. And I don't know if you caught this, dear listener, being picked up from the police station, the Foleys are in a rental. They're not in a Kia, which is the type of dealership that Mr. Foley owns. And there's a reference to the fact that they're used to having a different type of car, that this time we're in this SUV. So there might be a backstory there that we're going to get about why they don't have a consistent automobile, that they're having to go through rentals. Other curiosities, the bodyguard. The bodyguard for the wealthy mother-in-law, who makes a quick remark to the daughter as they're going upstairs whether or not she'd like to learn about the true ways of a samurai. There will certainly be a play on that later on in the season. Will our innocent-looking officer be tempted with a bribe given her financial problems? Will we see our meek and loving husband have to resort to some kind of violence in order to protect the integrity of his marriage and stand up for his woman? And how will the FBI weave themselves into this myriad of waves, of ripples being sent out in this Fargo universe? Like I said, dear listener, if you haven't watched the movie Fargo again, get yourself up to speed, and it won't take you long to catch up on 4 seasons of Fargo. Well, maybe it will, but what else are you watching? I'm sure that you've got emotional commitment to it, and I'm sure that it's trash. For the truly time-conflicted or constricted among you, at least the movie and season 1 of Fargo, the television program, that should get you up to speed, and you can jump into season 5. Thankfully, although they're all part of the same universe, you don't need to see every single season in order to follow along in the story of the individual seasons. I look forward to breaking it down with you all over the course of the next exciting 8 weeks. This is Why Don't Vote, a podcast.